Hello and welcome to Melomaniax, the podcast where we take unbiased deep dives into the biggest musicians and bands of all time. I'm Ashton.
And I'm Dallas. Today we're talking about a man who is credited for pioneering the reggae genre as well as popularizing Rastafarianism. That's right, it's Bob Marley. But first, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, follow on Instagram and TikTok, and most importantly, please hit us with those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. It's going to help us keep this podcast growing. And we do officially have a Patreon. It's live now. We offer a $5 a month tier. That's going to give you access to our private Melomaniax Discord, as well as a shout out on an episode and the ability to help us figure out what new episode topics might be.
So, when you think of Bob Marley, you probably think of reggae music, marijuana, the red, green, and yellow merchandise, the word love, just Jamaica in general. And Bob was an icon to the most, and a prophet to others, and a treasure to basically everybody. And a lot of his fame didn't come until after his death. It was really his wife post-mortem that really he blew up, and all of the merchandise went all over the place and everything like that. All that came after his life, so he never really got to see what his messages led to. But I mean, what is your I knew a lot about Bob Marley as far as before this episode. I learned a lot more, of course, actually diving into biography, reading a book, went to see the movie. I had listened to his music pretty much in depth. I think there were about 3 to 4 albums I had not heard, so there was some new music for me. So going in, I already had good, 60% of what I expected from the episode in my head. What about you?
I'm coming in pretty fresh face today. I have taught a lot of his songs, played some of his songs over the years in bands and stuff like that. But other than that, don't really know a whole lot about him. So I'm here to learn.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to start at the beginning, as we always do. Robert Nesta Marley was supposedly born on February 6, 1945 in 9 Mile, Jamaica. I say supposedly because the official birth certificate was never found, and Jamaica is really, really bad at keeping records of things, notoriously. They don't have much of a written history kept. So people's birth certificates hard to find, exact birth dates hard to find. Those kind of things are hard to locate. So they kind of nailed it to about February 6th. I think that's what he ends up celebrating as his birthday going forward. And his father was a white man, Jamaican born, of British descent, and his mother was an Afro-Jamaican. And I was curious, so I went and looked up what the white population left from British rule is still in Jamaica, and they occupy about 0.8% of the population in Jamaica is Caucasian. And then the largest demographic is about 92%, which is African descending Jamaicans. And then there's a bunch of other random percentages of Asian and Hispanic from other surrounding islands and whatnot. So I thought that was pretty interesting just to look at myself. And then Bob was actually born on his maternal grandfather's farm. And that same grandfather, Omariah, is the earliest musical inspiration to young Bob in the form of work songs. And so while growing up on 9 Mile, Bob started playing music with some local people, mainly Neville, as you'll later know as Bunny Wailer in primary school. It's so weird calling it primary, being from America, saying primary and secondary school.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it threw me off every single time because I was like, oh God, what is primary school again? As far as the lineup,
I'm still not sure I know.
Yeah, I think secondary school is like what your high school would be, or secondary school might be college, and primary school is through high school.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That's what I was kind of assuming when they mentioned it like that. That's how it seemed it was. So anyways, Bunny Wailer, his first musical buddy, and they would later add Peter Tosh, and the trio would go by a number of names. In order, I think they went by the Teenagers at first, then the Wailing Rude Boys, then the Wailing Wailers, and then finally settling on the Wailers. And eventually, Bob Marley's name would be so big that it would be Bob Marley and the Wailers. But, just the Wailers in the beginning. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's keep going with the childhood. So, Bob's father was not really in Bob's life. And I recently went to see the movie, like I said, the One Love movie. And in the movie, they make it out that his father was basically never in his life. And with the biography I read, it talks to us about a specific story. When Bob was 5, his family received a letter when he was living on the farm. They received a letter from Bob's father saying that he should let Bob be adopted by one of his nephews, because his nephew was the son of his brother, and his brother was a successful businessman and chief of a construction and civil engineering firm, and had a lot of money, a lot of connections, and would give Bob access to better schools and money and connections and whatnot. And the family wanted Bob to get a better education, but it sounded like they would never see Bob again if they did it that way. And so after a couple days, another letter came in, and Bob's father suggested that maybe he'd just go live with them and at least attend the good schools. So they kind of agreed to that and sent Bob with one of his cousins to Kingston. And when they arrived there, Bob was holding onto his cousin's hand through the crowd, and then in an instant, her hand was gone, and there was this big white man's hand holding onto his wrist. And he looked up, there was a large white man, he fainted, and it ended up being his dad. And his dad kind of abducted him, because he didn't tell anybody that he was taking him in. And so like Bob's mom didn't even know where he was for over a year, until she heard through like the grapevine where he was and came and picked him back up. But it was kind of weird. So I think they just like cleaned it up in the movie by just not including anything about his dad.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, because in the movie, Bob continuously has visions to this burning field and a man riding up to him on a horse. And it continuously goes throughout the whole movie. And at the very end, the guy goes up and it says he's his father. And I didn't know what purpose that played, because it didn't match up with anything I read in the biography. So
taking liberties.
Yeah, I couldn't really figure out the significance of that. But
yeah,
let's keep pushing forward. I want to get into the music.
Yeah, same. I'm excited.
Yeah. So years later, Bob, his mother, Thaddeus Livingston, and his son Neville, if you remember, would move to Trenchtown. So they were kind of like brother-in-laws, I guess. I believe that would be the proper. And so they moved to Trenchtown, Kingston, and the two boys would attend school together and started playing music together. And like I said, Neville would go by Bunny Wailer. And so early on, they wanted to just be a vocal group, and actually none of them played instruments. And local reggae artist Joe Higgs helped mentor Bob and the others, and actually was the one who taught Bob to play guitar early on. So then they got in, and then early radio inspiration mainly came from the new wave of ska, which is a music genre that was born in Jamaica in like the 50s, I believe, and it's like the early basis of reggae, as far as that really tangy guitar or drums, that kind of fast booka 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 kind of sound, that fast moving.
For sure,
it was like dance music for him. And a lot of American R&B would also get played on the radio down there. And so the two genres would sort of combine to make reggae in a way. There's an evolution. Ska kind of evolves into rock steady, and rock steady evolves into reggae. And rock steady is specifically referred to that we were talking before the show, like the guitar patterns that you see, that you hear in reggae, those quick kind of those really sharp, quick guitar movements that are, you're not really shining in a room if you're playing reggae on guitar. You're really getting more tested on your timing more than your technicalities.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense.
But anyways,
A lot of upstrokes.
Yep, your down and upstrokes and stuff. And so anyways, the three boys would add a few more members of the group. Man, I should have practiced these names. Junior Brathwaite, I believe, and then Beverly Kelso and Cherry Smith, and called themselves the Teenagers, remember?
Only reason I know Braithwaite is because that's a family in Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, interesting. Braithwaite.
So there you go. Probably not the same family.
Probably not. And then... So, of course, they would go through the evolution of being the Wailing Rude Boys and then becoming the Wailing Wailers. And around this time, they were discovered by a local record producer, Coxsone Dodd. And he was the one who came up with the idea to just call them the Wailers. Bring it down.
Nice.
Simplify it.
Coxsone Dodd, one of the great names on this show so far.
Oh, yeah, dude.
That and Cornelius Bumpus.
Cornelius
Bumpus takes number one.
Chef's kiss.
Coxsone Dodd might slide to that number 2 slot.
So their first album was actually named after their previous name iteration, The Wailing Wailers, and that released in 1965. And the first single from the album was Simmer Down. And in the movie, that was the song that they play that actually gets Coxsone to take them in and produce them. He's like out on them until they play that song, and then he's like, okay, that'll work. But it was actually a number 1 hit in Jamaica when it was released, and so they got a lot of attention right off the bat. And the other single released was a song written by Bob a few years earlier called Rude Boy. And another single that would end up evolving its sound over time, but One Love, the song, first originally came out on their debut album. This song would evolve so much over time and would end up on the Legends album in the very end in its current reggae form. And so the original of that song is just like straight ska. So I was super shocked to hear it. Yeah, I was like, oh my God, I did not know that this song sounded like this at one point. And you can hear if you want to hear a good difference between ska and reggae, this would be a great song since it's written in both iterations. And you can kind of, so that way you can listen to the original and be like, all right, this is ska. And then you can listen to the new and go, this is reggae. And you can compare and contrast.
Right. Yeah. Out of the two, personally, I'm definitely more of a reggae guy than a ska guy.
Same here. I could do ska for a couple, like maybe 3 songs, and after that third song, I'm gonna be hard pressed to put a 4th on.
Yeah.
So like reggae, I can just leave on. It can be pretty relaxing background music, but ska is just a little it's something else. But anyways, let's get back on track. And so nothing to talk about with charting, obviously. This album was only released in Jamaica, and Bob wasn't even on the album for all of it. Some of the time during recording, he was in America. So a distinction I gotta let you know early on is, so Bob, Bunny Wailer, and Peter Tosh eventually, and I'll get into it when it happens, all go down solo paths. So Peter Tosh is pretty famous for his solo work. Bunny Wailer's famous for his solo work as well. So everybody the whole time up until that point happens write songs, and you can go back and look at who wrote what, because it's distinguished. So a lot of songs are written by Peter and sung by Peter, and then written by Bob and sung by Bob, and so on and so forth. So that's why they were able to write and still put music out while Bob was in America.
Yeah, for sure. Just like a all-star team there.
Yep. Although there was
putting in work.
Yeah, it sounds good, but it gets interesting later. So, in 1966, Bob married Rita Anderson, and the book I read actually had some pictures from their wedding, and it's so weird to see pictures of Bob with no dreadlocks. Like literally just like short hair, really short hair, and super young. It's funny. And so at the time, Bob is still Catholic. He's grew up Catholic. Rastafarianism wasn't really super, super big yet, or even necessarily existed. And, or I guess in 66 it did. It was very, very early. So after the wedding, Bob and Rita actually moved to Wilmington, Delaware, which is close to where Bob's mother was living at the time. His mom remarried and moved up to Delaware, up in America, a little bit like previous. And so they move up there, and that would be, and it was the craziest culture shock to go from being like living in the ghettos of Jamaica to America. And as he put it, everything was extremely fast paced. He instantly regretted it and identified it as a big mistake. But he took a couple jobs while he was up there. He was a waiter, forklift driver, worked at a Chrysler assembly plant at one point. And he went by the pseudonym Donald Marley while he was there because he didn't have a work permit.
Uh-oh.
And so about a year later, I think it was right after he had been laid off from one of his jobs, he was notified he would need to register in the draft. And so he saw that as a good a sign as any to get a one-way ticket back to Kingston, Jamaica, and get out of the U.S. So, but before the move, he had already been planning to go back to Jamaica. He wanted to sell vinyl records. Like the actual like process of like buying the material, scraping it down into the circle, and like putting the music on it. Mm-hmm. So like the actual he was researching the whole process, and he figured he could make a living doing it. And so he had saved up a little bit of money. I believe he said he had about $700 saved up, but that wasn't really all that he needed. But upon his arrival back, it was said that he rolled up a large spliff, something he'd been doing since he was young, smoking marijuana, pretty common in the ghettos of Jamaica, apart from the actual Rastafari influences around. We'll get into that later. Other things common in the ghettos were soccer, huge down there, and then also a game called PG. Interesting game. I'm gonna explain it. It was in the biography. I put it in here because I thought it was an interesting one. So PG, it's a hand signal reflex game that allows you to take someone's possessions upon revealing the correct hand signal before your opponent. So basically, groups of boys in the beginning of the day would discuss like certain hand signals and call outs. And at a random point, like a third party member could yell out a call, and two members who were against each other had to put up the correct hand signal for the call before the other one. And if you did it first, then you could take every possession the other person had on them at the time. And so you could, if you were quick,
high stakes.
So if you were really, really fast, you could, or if you accidentally had something on you of like high value at the time that day, like you could get screwed. And so Bob was really good at this game. Also really good at playing soccer, and loved soccer ball handling and just playing. He played throughout his entire life, one of his favorite things to do. Mm-hmm. And then violence is also really common in Jamaica. So street fighting was common, and Bob was also highly respected for his fighting skills, but mainly more respected because he was that calm guy that didn't really spark up the fight. But if you got into it with him, he would end it kind of guy. And he's not very big. I think Bob Marley's like 5'4".
Jeez.
But everybody talked about that he's like would kick your ass and just like had like an intimidation factor about him that you couldn't explain. So that was one of his nicknames. Was 5 foot. Yeah, or I don't know if he was like his whole life, but I know that when he was young, he was very small for a while, and one of his nicknames was 5'4". But it's funny because of how they say
5'7", but
so he ended up getting up to 5'7". Okay, still not incredibly tall.
But correct, but yeah, that's not very tall for sure.
Well, it was one of his nicknames. Set was 5'4", or as the Jamaicans would say, 5'4".
There you go.
Or the way they write boy is BWAI. In the book that I read, whenever they're quoting a Jamaican saying boy, it's BWAI, boy.
Nice.
Boy. I just thought it was funny having to read and it prefaced it at the very beginning of the book that a lot of the interviews, he did a bunch of the interviews and had to get some a translator from Harvard to help him put it into writing because of how thick Jamaican accents are. So anyways,
imagine going to Harvard and coming out and that's your job.
That's your job. Yep. That would as long as it pays well, right? That's all they want,
I guess. Yeah.
I don't really know, but anyways, we'll go back to the present. Bob was selling vinyls. He set up a little 4x4 stand, and he was selling some of his own personal records, some of Rita's. Rita's a singer. She did some solo stuff. They did some duets. He was selling some Whaler stuff. He was selling some of Coxzone's records as well. Coxzone now represented a few more groups, including Burning Spear, the Midals, Johnny Osborne, Joseph Hill, Marcia Griffiths, the Gladiators, and Dennis Brown. And if I'm being completely honest, I had only heard of Burning Spear, and I've listened to one or two of their albums before. It's another reggae group from the 70s.
Nice.
So, and then I went and listened to Dennis Brown, and he's good classic reggae sound. I have not gotten to the others. But as for Bob's original music, he just lacked the cash to really keep up with radio play for his stuff. And so he was already barely making ends meet. And the Wailers was still releasing occasional songs under Coxzone, but this slowed down a lot with Coxzone getting so many new groups under him. And the band started to slowly transition into rocksteady. This is about when that shift happened from ska to rocksteady as far as the Jamaican listening. And so the band itself was on edge around this time, especially with the lack of interest from Coxzone. And so Peter and Bunny were specifically on edge with Coxzone already. There was just all kinds of tempers between those three all the time. And the tipping point was when Coxzone asked Peter to come play keyboards for another group, and Peter refused to do it and told Bunny, and the two confronted Coxzone, and the whole dispute went down. The police were involved, and because of this...
Is there more to that story? Because if I asked you to come play keyboards on an album, that doesn't seem like it
was with intentions for him to join that group permanently and leave the Wailers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was Coxzone being dirty about it.
Gotcha.
Trying to get Peter to leave the Wailers.
I see.
So then he went back and was told Bunny, and they were pissed. So then
that makes sense.
Yeah. And so after this, around this time, the Kingston becomes a hot spot for police harassment. The whole area. And so Bunny gets arrested in early 1967 for ganja possession, even though he actually had none on him. Both officers agreed in court that he stashed some in a nearby barrel that they were unable to locate. So, which I think is funny because that shit would not hold up in American court at all. A defense lawyer would
for
absolutely...
sure. But also, couldn't you probably arrest every single person in Jamaica for ganja possession?
You would think.
It's kind of a part of it.
That's a misnomer. Is actually, so marijuana is still illegal in Jamaica, has been for a long time.
That is so insane.
And it's actually only really common, just like in America, among the lower income and specifically the Rasta community, which is a very, very small percentage of Jamaicans. In fact, most of the average Jamaican population don't like the Rasta community because they come around smoking weed and talk about their Rasta stuff. It's a very small percentage that are actually Rastas, and most of them are most of Jamaica is pretty annoyed with the Rasta community a lot of the times.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, so it's actually
every day.
Yeah, they just get more annoyed that they're just always smoking and not doing anything, and they kind of look at them as a bunch of bums. Is how the average Jamaican looks at the Rastas. Now, of course,
That's
the Rastas. There's
and then I would be even more annoyed because the whole world looks at Jamaica like it's just the Rastafarians.
Yep. Exactly, and it's actually a very small percentage of the people there. So yes, they
Interesting.
and that is the one thing that comes up is they hated that everybody just associated everyone in Jamaica with the Rasta community, that it got like a bad rep.
Right.
So that's why I was, and I,
Well,
when
Bob did get very famous.
yeah, and Bob is the reason that it is associated directly with Jamaica, and I thought it was interesting when I found out marijuana was illegal there, because I always thought it was like, I was like, everyone smokes it down there. Nope,
Yeah.
it's illegal.
I think I had heard that at some point actually too. It's one of those surprising, funny kind of tidbits.
I think it's medically allowed now, I believe, or what it is I think so. This is one way to get around it. I think there's designated acreage that they gave to the Rasta community, and they can smoke on their property in their temples, but they're not supposed to have it anywhere in public near towns. Like, they have their own reserved area, but the issue is they still come off of their area and like smoke in public and shit. So
Yeah.
yeah, but they do have like a designated area, I believe, that nobody is supposed to mess with them.
That makes sense.
But let's get back on track.
That's
there's a little
ultimate,
history for some people.
That's the ultimate pothead move, by the way. Just be like, it's part of my religion. I have to do it.
Yep. Part of the practice.
Yeah,
So,
I have no choice. It's in the Bible. It's in my Bible.
yeah, so but anyways, we'll get back, and that gives some people some insight to Jamaica, I guess, if they didn't
There we go.
know previous. So anyways, after the possession, and Bunny spent a year and 2 months in jail, I believe.
That is so wild.
Year and 2 months, and Bob would actually get himself a little 48-hour jail time for a traffic violation. He was riding in somebody's car, and the car was I don't know if it was like didn't have plates or like illegal or something, but like something with the title, and he was just in the car, and so he was put in jail for 48 hours. So like,
Jeez.
yeah, well, it's like I said, the police harassment gets really heavy with the Rasta community, which actually Bob isn't even Rasta at this point still. And but anyways, once Bunny's released, Bob and the Wailers turned to the last recording producer that was left, now that the bridge was burned with Coxzone, Leslie Kong. And Bob and Peter had actually been writing slightly different music during Bunny's absence, and Kong decided to cut a few singles for the band. And unfortunately, they performed quite mediocrely, and so the music had improved on the rock steady sound, but their lyrics were just lacking any kind of cleverness or effectiveness to really draw you in. Just lazy writing is basically what it said. And so and also on top of that, the Wailers were kind of losing, interest in the interest in the Wailers was being lost in the local like record charts. So like the locals were listening to other stuff, not really listening to the Wailers. So they kind of became an outcast group on the fringes. And so only one thing left to do was to find an outcast of a producer. And so Lee Scratch Perry was their guy, an unpredictable fellow that used to record under Coxzone, but felt like Coxzone was holding him back. So he released 2 singles directed towards his old boss, Run for Cover and The Upsetter. And these songs both were top sellers. So I guess he was right, suck it moment. And before anybody could get him under a contract, he released another single called People Funny Boy. And the beat from this song is kind of like the presage to what we call reggae. This was like the first song that had like the reggae beat. And after this song, a lot of Jamaican bands started implementing the new 2-chord reggae pattern displayed in the song. This was like the that guitar going and the drums,
sure.
like the yeah. It was. So this was like, I went and listened to it, and it was like, oh yeah, you can hear like every reggae song like bases itself off of this. Mm-hmm. And so it was like that. It was template. Like that first one. Yeah, it was the template. So basically, he kind of got that kind of new sound off the floor that would overtake rock steady now. And so he had a studio band called The Upsetters, and the band consisted of 2 brothers who left to join another group, and then it had a keyboardist singer Glenn Adams and guitarist Alva Lewis. And so Bob was extremely interested in talking to the group because they had toured in Europe and actually had a decent like little reggae following in Europe. So he was really interested in talking to them, and he became very friendly with them, so much so that he actually asked the Upsetters to play on a song that he wrote and convinced them to leave Perry and join him. And so of course Perry was furious because that was like his baby. That band was killing it for him. And he even threatened to kill Bob. But the two had a meeting, settled down, and then the Upsetters joined Bob and the Wailers, creating a super band that would be under Lee Perry as their producer. And
nice.
around this time, that big moves, baby. And so around this time, the Rasta way of life was growing on Bob, and he was actually had first heard of it, the Rasta movement, from Rita when he was living in Delaware. And because in 1966, Haile Selassie, who is regarded as the Rastafari literature, the second coming of Jesus, essentially, he's a very, very famous, influential member of the Rastafari, like, ways and beliefs. But he actually in person came to visit Jamaica in 1966, and it was like one of the biggest things that's ever happened. Like, the whole airport was full of people that were there to see him, and it was basically would be the equivalent to like Jesus flying into America today, like and all the Christians and stuff lining up outside the plane to see him. It is basically what this moment is equivalently to the Jamaican people, and specifically the Rastafari. And so Haile Selassie and Marcus Garvey are responsible for the basis that built Rastafarianism. And Marcus Garvey is another Jamaican who spent a lot of time in London and actually cultivated the early I'll say Black Power kind of movements, as far as like he's on a monument with like Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Haile Selassie, and Marcus Garvey are like that's like your Mount Rushmore. And so he started some early Black independence stuff in London and everything. So and he so between those two, they basically carved out everything that Rastafarianism is built on. And so Bob's growing interest in the Rasta led him to the only man in Jamaica that stood shoulder to shoulder with Selassie, and that was Mortimer Plano. And Plano started taking Bob to some hidden locations around the island and teaching him the ways, took him under his wing. And this would be the main, if you go see the movie, this is the guy that has the humongously long dreadlocks that wrap around his neck and go down his back. If you go see the movie, you'll recognize him. But this guy really teaches him the ways, and Bob was actually very slow to accepting Rastafarianism at first, and then it's ironic because he ends up becoming like the prophet of Rastafarianism as far to the people, the man that actually made it so what it is around the world. So back to the music. Bob was working with the Wailers and Perry in Jamaica, but also stayed open to recording with some American British producers that he knew, that he had met when he was in America, Sims and Nash. And so he still kept communication with them just in case. And Perry was busy tightening up the Wailers sound, and he fine-tuned Bob's high-pitched singing and gave him a little more direction, backed down the harmonies, decided to not get obsessed with horns like a lot of Jamaican producers were at the time with the reggae sound. He actually went no horns, which was unique to itself. And he preferred, as it said, a flinty rhythm guitar that was cut into sharp stabs wound around a bass line. What do you think about that?
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, I was like, flinty? Never really heard the word, but it's so perfect.
I guess, like, real quick, chunk, Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is
Exactly.
perfect word.
That's why I was like, that's perfect.
Sounds like the striking of a flint to me.
Yep, that's that kind of motion. That's the rhythm and the motion. So anyways, Bob and the Wailers continued writing and recording music through 69 and 70, leading to the release of their second studio album, Soul Rebels. And Soul Rebel was released in December of 1970, and this was the first album of theirs that would be released outside of Jamaica as well.
Nice.
And they didn't have any singles or charting yet, but at least this was an international release. And they did do a reggae cover of the James Brown song "My Cup." That was cool, I thought.
Nice. That's a nice weird move.
Right. Well, that's like that's what like early R&B, jazz kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff would be playing in Jamaica.
Yeah.
James
Makes
Brown.
sense.
Yep. So definitely one of the influences. But anyways, the album had some success in Jamaica and Britain, but really only sold to like the reggae roots crowds. So like people who already knew about the music, didn't really reach anybody new. And the small success was giving Bob more recognition. And around this time, Rita actually decided to put her personal music career on hold because she did solo stuff herself, like I said, and to help with the kids. So by this time, Bob and Rita had 3 kids. So Rita had 1 kid that she brought into the relationship, and then her and Bob had Ziggy and Sadella up to this point. Most people know who Ziggy is because he, I think, was behind Bob the next Marley that was big in music was Ziggy Marley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and who also went into the...
I do know that.
Yep. And he actually co-produced the One Love film. So most of what you see was Ziggy, and that's because Ziggy was growing up alongside Bob during all this. Like, truly, Ziggy was there for most of it, so he was able to keep the film pretty accurate. And but anyways, Rita ends up joining 2 other girls at some point as a trio, and they become the backing vocalists for the Wailers. So she ends up just kind of singing full time with Bob's group. And so
Nice.
Bob and the Wailers follow their 1970 album with another the following year, Soul Revolution Part 2. And when I read that, I was like, wait, what happened to Part 1? And so there's a little explanation of it that like something happened in distribution that like you'll find some copies that are called Soul Revolution 1 and some that are called Part 2, but it's all the same album. And
But there's no, yeah.
nobody knows what happened. So like maybe there was supposed to be like an A side, B side thing that got messed up. But anyways, it's not really important. All has the same music. So, but anyways, prior to the release of their 1970 album that I had talked about, they had a single out that was doing really well called Doopy Conqueror. And that didn't end up landing on an album until this Soul Revolution album. So it actually was a single released before their first album, but didn't actually make it till their second, which I don't know what causes. Okay. Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff like that from bands and artists. And AC/DC, I think, is like that, where they had multiple songs on multiple albums. And it was just like, who knows? I don't remember the actual reasoning for that, or even if that's true. But because that was during, the LimeWire era where you'd get a download of an MP3 that was called like "Pour Some Sugar on Me" by Kiss, and it was like "Sweet Child of Mine," like,
yeah,
like all that stuff. Where
the only thing I could think recently like
what was going on
was when Taylor Swift didn't release "Cruel Summer" until 2023, but it was from like her 2019 album, I think, or something like that, because of COVID.
And that might have had something to do with a video. I don't know.
It was because of COVID, but
it was on the album in 2020.
Yes, but it wasn't released as a single until like 3 or 4 years later, and then it became a number 1. So it was like interesting how they release like singles. But I guess it was the opposite, that it was released as a single, but then it didn't show up on an album for a while. I just thought it was interesting. That's why I mentioned it.
I bet with an artist like Taylor Swift, where there's not that many of those, but
yeah, but
whatever single you release is going to hit number 1.
Yeah, but that ended up being the only single from the album, so I guess it was just a long-running single, is how they made their play. But
okay.
Also released in 1971 was another album the band had recorded, but they recorded it with Leslie Kong back when they were doing stuff with him, but they never released it. And so Leslie had a collection of songs by the Wailers that were never released. And so even though this album is called The Best of the Wailers, ironically, it's not a compilation album. It's actually just unreleased music, so it's an original album. So already it's kind of weird, because I was like, wait, how do they have a best of already? But yeah. So he releases it, so when Wailers caught word that Kong was going to release some of their work, now they're not with him anymore, so this is just completely without them. Bunny decided to pay him a visit, and Bunny told him to not release the album or he would die. And Kong
This is literally like the Taylor Swift thing.
Dude, yeah. And so Kong ignored Bunny, put the album out anyways. And I have to say a little backstory. So originally when Kong was going to work with the Wailers, Kong's brother told him not to get involved with the Wailers or it's going to lead to his death. Like a foreshadowed story. And then Bunny also said, if you release this, dude, you're going to die. So Bunny releases it. And a couple weeks later, Bunny's accountant shows up and actually notifies him that the success of the album has made him a millionaire. So the album does well, and it's did enough sales that it pushed him into millionaire status. He goes home that night and then dies of a heart attack in his sleep at 38 years old with zero history of heart conditions in ever or even in his family. Like absolute pure mystical like heart attack death out of nowhere.
Crazy.
And I was just like, I had to blame it on some Jamaican voodoo of some sort.
Or he got like poisoned or something.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, the autopsy just was like unexplained heart attack. I guess Crazy. Just being a millionaire was too much for him to handle.
Yeah. How much? That's too many zeros.
Yep, too much.
Gone.
Anyways, I thought that was crazy, so I had to include that.
Yeah, that's nuts. That is nuts.
But anyways, after all this, Bob got a call from Johnny Nash and Danny Sims, those two guys he had known. And they wanted him to come write some music for a film they were working on called So Much to Believe. And so Bob actually went up to Sweden and Britain to work on the music for the film. And although none of the music he actually wrote would end up making the final cut, he did fall in love with a lot of the Scandinavian cities, and his presence was enough that Sims really thought Bob was going to be something. And so he called up the Wailers and wanted to set up a UK tour. And the Wailers agreed, and they all came out there. And then the tour did not really ever pan out. So they just kept getting booked at some college shows and a couple bars and speakeasies, and nothing not like a real tour ever panned out. And the Wailers ended up getting talked into hitting the recording studio with Nash while they were there. And the Marley songs that were written with him were Stir It Up, Guava Jelly, and Comma Comma. And Stir It Up actually went and hit number 12 on the British survey at the time.
Nice.
And then the song would do even better in America the next year. And so the Wailers kept getting promised a tour that would constantly get delayed. And the band was already living in a cheap London hotel. They were practicing in a cellar so they could stay warm on their instruments, and not a lot was going on for them. They were broke, alienated in a foreign country. And so word got around about the situation, and they approached Brent Clark, who was hired by Sims to help promote reggae to local bands and stuff and venues. And so they went to him to see if he could salvage the situation. And so he went to Chris Blackwell of Island Records, and Blackwell basically lent €8,000 to help fly them back to Jamaica in beliefs that they were going to be lining up a record deal. And they ended up not signing with him. And so once they did get back in Jamaica, so they still did take the money and move, there. It's just a deal didn't exactly line up then. So they get back to Jamaica and they hit the recording studio with the leftover funds, with Bob as the leading producer. And in December of 1972, Bob flew back to London with the master tracks that they recorded in Jamaica with high hopes, but he flew straight into a legal argument because if we remember, Sims claims to have control of Bob because that's who brought him over. But then CBS is who Chris Blackwell works for. And so CBS said, oh, no, we've also paid for him because of the 8,000. So basically both groups were like, we own Bob. And so anyways, a legal dispute was settled. And so like, I think Sims gets like a percentage of music that they do, but CBS does maintain control of Bob and the Wailers going forward. And so once a settlement is reached, Bob and the Wailers were clear to release their first album under Island Records called Catch a Fire. So Catch a Fire was released April 13th, 1973. And fun fact, that's the name of the biography I read. It's called Catch a Fire.
Nice.
If anybody wants to read it, it was really good. A lot of details. And anyways, Catch a Fire was the 5th studio album by the Wailers, because unfortunately you have to count the best of the Wailers that Kong released without their permission. So this makes album number 5, and the album peaked at number 171 on the Billboard 200 in America. So it actually hit the top 200.
Nice.
And the album's first single was Baby We've Got a Date. And they also released Stir It Up on this album, like I had mentioned the single previous. And Stir It Up hit number 12 on the Billboard 100. So that was, I think, actually like their highest hitting in America. But that one did really well.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a lot higher than I would have thought.
Yeah, and the album was very well received and is even regarded today as one of the greatest reggae albums of all time. And Rolling Stones even put it at number 123 on their 500 greatest albums of all time. And it's the second highest reggae album on the list behind the later Legends album.
Now that would be a fun talk show episode, the 500 greatest albums of all time.
I made that mental note when I came across that.
Yeah,
I was like, that would be a good one, because I would love to see that list. So anyways, the album was followed with an actual tour this time to help promote it that took place in London and America. And Blackwell knew that he needed to follow Catch a Fire with another album right away while the masses and press were interested. So they followed up Catch a Fire with Burnin'. And Burnin' was released October 19th, 1973, so a couple months later.
Dang.
Yep.
2 albums in the same year.
Yep, and it's the 6th album by the Wailers, and this would also be the last album that would include Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer before their solo careers. There had already been some tension with Peter over the fact that the group kept being advertised as Bob Marley and the Wailers. That's just how Chris Blackwell wanted to promote the group, because Bob had more recognition than the group itself at this time. And so he was already kind of didn't like that at all, because Peter is definitely was a main songwriter and singer in the group as well. And so he said, a lot of things like, why are they singling him out, when we're a group? But anyways, back to the album. It would actually hit 151 on the Billboard 200. So another good album in America. I'd say just hitting the Billboard 200 as a reggae album is a success. So there weren't really any singles, but there were 3 famous songs from the album. Mm-hmm. I Shot the Sheriff. Most people know that one.
Of course.
Get Up, Stand Up, and then Small Axe. So I had never heard Small Axe, and going into it, I actually really liked that song. It became one of my favorites. And so going forward, Bob Marley and the Wailers would be the name after Peter and Bunny left, the official name. And so these 2 albums started raising all kinds of rumors and conspiracies with Black Power and the Rastas killing white tourists in Jamaica, just like these random just like random news go wrong on the reggae genre popping up in Britain, just getting the same thing happened with Dungeons and Dragons. When it came around, people were like, they're gonna steal your son and make him hail Satan, or that kind of shit.
It's the same with metal music, punk music, every kind of music.
All the same kind of stuff. So the naysayers were saying they're the Rastas are killing white tourists and, you know, all this kind of crazy shit. So there was just rumors and things like that. And so people started to ask questions about these snake-haired cultists. And so after all these questions and stuff, a couple people actually stood up to defend the reggae scene. And the first of which was Paul McCartney, who claimed that reggae is where it's at the time. I could just see him, like that quote with him, like kind of smiling. Like a thumbs up.
Yeah, for sure.
Paul McCartney approves of reggae. And not just that, Mick Jagger actually hired a reggae band for his wedding at the time. And then Paul Simon over at America decided to actually just go ahead and take a trip down to Kingston to record some music down there, which is such a Paul Simon thing. I can't wait for us to do him because he's one of those guys very much like Damien Albarn that just like travels around the world and records music in all kinds of locations just to take local sound and implement it into his own music writing.
That's awesome.
But anyways, all this attention to the Rastafari people would become worldwide, and like this is where the Rasta man kind of becomes the face of like the third world and why we identify Rastafarianism with Jamaica. It's like because of these earlier albums, you know, coming up and with Bob and the Wailers. So the situation got even worse down in Jamaica, though, because the Rastas got drawn into politics. And so Jamaica had only actually earned their independence as recent as 1962. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't. That's cool.
So political turmoil would shroud Jamaica for ever afterwards. But we're not quite there yet. So the main disturbance that happened is Michael Manley, who was the prime minister of Jamaica, following his father, Norman Manley. And so Norman played a huge part in helping Jamaica actually gain independence. And so Michael became the bearer of the opposition party and started manipulating the growing Rasta population. And he opposed Edward Seaga, who was the leader of the Jamaican Labour Party. And there was just constant turmoil and fighting between these. And below these two figures, each were backed by like gangs. And so all the violence was like backed by each group below them. So Jamaica became a pretty dangerous place. And around this time, Bob was kind of becoming known as the king of reggae around the Kingston people, obviously. And people were very curious to see Bob's relationship with Michael. So around this time, Bob was, you know, back in Jamaica hanging out and not in London because they had made a little bit of money and were recording. And so they were very curious to see where where Bob's stance was in everything. And it seemed more that Bob was more interested in just himself and his own visions and stuff rather than the other two parties. And so Bob best staked his position when he released the 1974 album Natty Dread. And so this one had some like political statements that didn't really land on either side. It was just kind of like, this is my stance, which is like kind of no stance. We should be, and then more so bringing in his religious beliefs with the politics. So kind of separated himself away from the two parties with this album. But Natty Dread is actually hit number 92 on the Billboard 200, so making improvements up in America on the Billboard. And the album was released with one single that you might have heard of, No Woman, No Cry. Possibly, you know, might have heard that song. But it actually didn't chart, which is, I thought it would, because that was a pretty big song. And the live version, which is actually the more famous version, ranks number 37 on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. So that's actually pretty high praise for the song.
That's super high.
Yeah, right? Top 50. And then that album was followed with a tour that took up most of 1975. It went across to America and Europe. Most of his tours are just America and Europe. That's where most of his fan bases are. But in the midst of recording, they were recording their 8th album, Rastaman Vibrations, Bob and them actually took a pause to work on a song, Jaw Live, and this is another religious song that they released as a single, and it would take Kingston by storm and become a #1 hit in Jamaica. And then they would just put the song on the actual album Rastaman Vibration, which was released April 30th of 1976. And this album was actually a huge success in America, hitting #8 on the Billboard 200. So we kind of saw a pattern there of like growing intensity on that Billboard 200. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of like peaks with this album. And weird enough, this album had no singles and no really famous songs, actually. Like, none of the songs from this album are on Legends. So, like, this album is kind of one that doesn't really have famous songs, yet it was the one that did the best in America, which just blows my mind. I don't know. It's interesting. But it does have the song War on it, which is probably the most known song on it. And it uses a lot of lyrics from the lyrics use words from a speech by Haile Selassie. So, and that song was one of the ones used during the film. There were quite a few songs used during the film.
Nice.
Yeah, so. But anyways, so now 1976, Jamaica is like, this is basically the climax of their most violent times. Like, basically everyone had a gun. Like, guns, violence were just rampant in the streets. Turmoil between the two political parties. It actually became so bad that Jamaica was put into a state of emergency on June 19th and put them into martial law because it was so bad. And so Michael Manley was still fighting against the JLP, and Bob basically was like friendly with both sides, which didn't sit well with anybody either. And because he just didn't want to pick a side. And so during this period, he was actually approached about performing a free outdoor peace concert called Smile Jamaica. It was actually being set up by Michael Manley, the prime minister. And 2 days before the concert, Bob, Rita, and their manager, Don Taylor, were all shot in their home in an assassination attempt. Everyone recovered. Yep. And Bob was actually shot in his arm and his chest. And most of the Wailers went into hiding after that, but a few of them showed up 2 days later, and Bob had to enlist the help of the band Zap Pow to fill in, and he still performed at the concert, the Smile Jamaica, 2 days after being shot. In the movie, they show Rita getting shot in the head, and that her dreadlock saved her from getting from the bullet entering her brain. I don't know if that's a true story, but I know Rita was part of the writing process, so it's very possible. And if so, that's kind of crazy. Dreadlocks are like...
Yeah, that's crazy.
Human helmet, dude.
I know, right?
Like, damn, stopping bullets, dude. That's kind of impressive.
Yeah, dude.
But anyways, after the concert, Bob felt like Jamaica was no longer safe for him or his family, and so he moved Rita and the kids. Yeah, I know, right? After everybody got shot.
Martial law didn't do it, but getting actually physically shot might have.
Well, it's because he lived on a compound with like a gated-in compound with Omariah, and so it was like crazy because somebody in the movie, the guy just like goes up into their house and shoots him because it's like pretty open like that, but it becomes like, and then going forward in the movie, there's like armed guards at the door or at the gate, you know, like, so it definitely goes like higher. But so he sends Rita and the kids up to Delaware with his mom, and then him and the band go back out to London. And so back in London, Bob starts working on the album that would be the focal point of the movie, Exodus. And so Exodus is the 9th studio album by Bob Marley and the Wailers. It was released June 3rd, 1977, and the album hit 20 on the Billboard 200 and number 8 in the UK. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the title track, Exodus, and this would actually be a number 1 hit in Jamaica, as well as hitting number 14 in the UK. And I think it hit the bubbling under in the US. I think it was like 103.
Okay.
The next single, in no particular order, I don't know what order they were released. There's not a whole lot of information on that. It just said released as a single. Jamming. Yep, jamming. One of my personal favorite songs, but Jammin' hit number 9 on the UK charts. Next is Waiting in Vain, another classic that hit 27 on the UK charts. And then probably like the most famous song that he has, Three Little Birds, which is the Don't Worry About a Thing. Yep, that's that song.
Of course.
This song would reach 17 on the UK charts, and then this is the album that Bob re-released a version of One Love that was the new reggae version instead of the ska version. So it came out on this album. And it peaked at number 5 in the UK. And the album went gold in the US, the UK, and Canada. So
wow.
Big hit. And it was made a really big hit in the movie as well.
I can't imagine two places further apart in almost every way than Canada and Jamaica.
Right. So
not distance, just like, culture, weather,
everything.
People.
Yep. Accents.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, Bob followed this album with another the following year, Always Staying Busy. So March 23rd, 1978, Kaya was released. And Kaya is the 10th studio album released by Bob Marley and the Wailers. And the album would enter the Billboard 200 at 50 and would actually reach number 4 on the charts in the UK. And there are 2 notable singles from this album. And the first was Is This Love, which peaked at number 9 on the UK charts. And the second was Satisfy My Soul. And Satisfy My Soul is actually a re-recorded version of Don't Rock My Boat, which was an earlier song from the Wailers. And that hit number 21 on the UK charts. And when I was re-listening to the discography and I heard the song, I was like, wait, I didn't know this was I didn't know this was like a changed song. So they used he used about 70% of the song and then changed it up a little bit.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then re-recorded it. Yeah. So it was like, it was really cool to like hear that. And so right after the release of this album, Bob agreed to play another peace concert in Jamaica. So it's a couple years later, after being a little more reassured. But this is the One Love peace concert, and it was held April 22nd, 1978 in Kingston, Jamaica. And towards the end of the concert, Bob actually had Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, the leader of the JLP, the 2 guys that have been fighting the whole time, join on stage and shake hands. And they actually showed live footage of that during the movie, during the credits. I'm not gonna lie, I teared up during that part. It was kind of cool. Yeah, because just like with after you watch the whole movie and like all the everything Bob had been through, getting shot for those 2 guys and stuff, and then like has them join hands, and then he like yells to the crowd like "One Love, Jamaica," and like everyone goes nuts.
I was just gonna say, look at Ashton in the theater tearing up over Jamaican politics in the 70s. It's like couldn't be further from your life,
right? Jesus. Yeah, but anyways,
it just really gets me going. 70s politics in the Caribbean.
Oh, come on! It's just the moment. Anyways, I'm gonna go backwards for just a sec though. In around mid-1977, Bob was diagnosed with a type of malignant melanoma under his right big toe. So this is he did injure his foot playing soccer, but contrary to popular belief, it actually had nothing to do with his death. All the injury did was just bring the underlying cancer to light, essentially. So the cancer was going to spread through his body regardless of him hurting his toe or not. It just he hurt his toe playing soccer and then it never healed. And that's why they figured it out, because it couldn't regenerate. And they were like, what is going on? So he was recommended to get the toe amputated, but this would have stopped him from touring. And it completely goes against the Rastafari way, which is why they don't cut their hair and that you don't go under the knife. So, and he actually does kind of break that rule a little bit and gets a skin graft later to go over the toe because the nail falls off. And so he does get a skin graft on it, but he stood his ground and did not get the toe amputated and continued to record music. And that leads us to album number 11, which released October 2nd, 1979. And That album was called Survival, and this was one of the few albums that I had not ever heard. Not even a song from it until I listened to the discography for the research. So this was a new one for me, and it was able to hit number 20 on the charts in the UK. The album didn't have any singles, but it did include the song Zimbabwe, which Bob played at a festival in Zimbabwe in celebration of their independence the following year in 1980. And that would actually be the only time Bob ever got to visit Africa. And he actually had planned, unfortunately, he ultimately wanted to, before the cancer, he wanted to buy some land and go live in Ethiopia, like buy some land for him and all of his family and everything. So he did have plans to go back to Africa, but due to the cancer and the short amount of time he had, he decided to spend it continuing to write music and perform music and spread the word. So they continued touring, hitting the studio, and with the little time Bob had, and they released their 12th album, Uprising, on June 10th, 1980. And this would be the last album released during Bob's living life, so while he was alive. And the album would hit the charts in the UK at number 6. And the first single for the album was Could You Be Loved? A song hit number 5 on the charts in the UK. And the song did really well on the charts across Europe, like in general. Like it was like top 5 for almost every single country over there. Not so much America though. And I don't think the next song was released as a single, but it's one of his most famous songs, Redemption Song. The version, the acoustic version, as well as the band version, were from this album. And then I like this one, just Bob's voice and the acoustic guitar. Pretty powerful song. It's got a little issue in it for you, but that's all right. Stay on time, Bob. Be professional. Come on, dude. You're a pro, aren't you? Anyways, come on, Bob. Anyways, this song was written approximately in 1979 while Bob was dealing with his own mortality. So kind of a emotional song. And then personally, the B-side of this album, for me, one of my favorites. Like, just this B-side, like, dude, all 5 songs are just like heaters for me. If I could just listen to, like, so like, not the whole album in its entirety, but like that second half. If I had to pick a favorite album, I'd have to agree with Exodus. It's just absolutely so good. But the B-side on this one gets a special shout out from me. So after Uprising, Bob and the band did a European tour and then followed up with 2 shows in America. And while he was in New York for his Madison Square Garden show, Bob collapsed while jogging in Central Park. He was rushed to the hospital, and that's when they discovered that the cancer had spread to his lungs, heart, and brain. So Bob did play a show, his last show, 2 days later in Pennsylvania, and he had to cancel the rest of the tour. And he spent 8 months in a specific cancer clinic in Germany, and he was going under radiation treatment. They said his dreadlocks fell out, and everything, kind of sad. But the radiation proved ineffective, and Bob wanted to make it back to Jamaica before he died, and he took a flight back. But during the flight, his vitals took a turn for the worst, and when the plane connected to Miami, he was rushed to the hospital and ended up passing away May 11th, 1981. And he was buried at a chapel near his birthplace in 9 Mile, Jamaica, with his red Gibson Les Paul, a Bible open to Psalm 23, and his wife placed a stalk of ganja in his coffin with him. So, and I do believe he's still buried there today. And our story's not over yet, though, because 2 more albums to talk about. So the first was Confrontation, which came out May 23rd, 1983, just about 2 years after his death. And the album was a compilation of unreleased material and singles. The album would hit 55 on the Billboard 200. And most notably from this album was the song Buffalo Soldier. Hit number 4 in the UK. This was my favorite song as a kid when I was growing up. And then the final album we're going to talk about is the one I'm most familiar with.
Your favorite song by Bob, or your favorite song of all songs?
That was my favorite song by Bob Marley.
Nice.
Yeah, when I was a kid. Not anymore, but it was when I was young. And so Yeah, because when I was a kid, I just distinctly remember my dad always playing the Legend album or the Legends album. And so this one, it has a lot of nostalgia for me. And this was released by Rita Marley and Chris Blackwell in 1984, I believe. And it's just a compilation of all of Bob's greatest hits. And this would actually go on to be the best-selling reggae album of all time. It sold around 75 million copies worldwide, and the album entered the top the charts in the UK and number 5 in the US when it came out. And I'm just gonna read out the songs that made the list. So it was "Is This Love," "No Woman No Cry," the live version, "Could You Be Loved," "Three Little Birds," "Buffalo Soldier" remixed, "Get Up Stand Up," "Stir It Up," "One Love," "People Get Ready," / "People Get Ready," the remix. So that's like the newer version. "I Shot the Sheriff," "Waiting in Vain" remix, "Redemption Song," the acoustic live version, and then the "Satisfy My Soul," "Exodus" remixed, and then "Jamming" remixed. And I say remix because it's just a remastered current reggae form of the song. So that's all it is. But anyways, that album is the one I am like super familiar with. And then I actually have just a couple of random facts and things to talk about while we're closing up here. First funny little fact, he actually owned a BMW, and he bought a BMW. It was one of 2 cars he owned, and he bought it because he said it stood for Bob Marley and the Wailers. BMW.
Nice, that's a good reason. Just imagine being,
good.
typical BMW driver, like coming up behind you, screeching by, ignoring all the rules of the road, and then you look over and it's Bob Marley.
Bob Marley, yep. So it was, next we'll talk about his kids a little bit. It was said that he has about 11 kids, but it's like one of those things that you don't know, because there was a period of time where he had a couple mistresses and stuff, and he had a couple kids with some mistresses that Rita would end up raising, actually. She really was like a rock throughout everything for Bob Marley. That woman
sounds like, yeah,
made him what he is. She's awesome. But anyways, so he has a bunch of them, including so he said Ziggy, who did music, Damian Marley became famous doing music. He does some reggae stuff and some like rap, like hip hop. There's a famous song going around right now by YG Marley, which is a grandson of his, who just released his first song. So music is very prevalent, and a lot of his other sons and daughters have performed some kind of reggae style music in a band or done some kind of music in the space. So they continue his legacy. Bob lives through all of them in a way. Yeah, it's really cool to see. One of his sons, I gotta look at Raheem. Is that his? Rohan was a football player, and his 3 kids, one was a reggae artist, another is the YG Marley I said, and another was an NFL football player. So I thought that was cool, like a little bit of football genes in there.
There we go.
But that about wraps it up. I also didn't mention that I think it was in 1970, Bob and the Wailers opened their own label, and it's a recording studio now called Tough Gong, which is one of Bob's nicknames growing up.
Oh, cool.
Yep. So, but I think that basically wraps us up on all the music. He died at 36, but had a ton of albums during that time, a lot of music, and reached a lot of people, man. So some huge impact, but let's dive into those ratings while we're fresh on it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, oh man, for creativity, I'm actually gonna have to go in here and rate it at a probably around a 2. It seems like, I know there's a lot of evolution in the music from ska to rocksteady to reggae, but that wasn't necessarily Bob Marley himself. That was more so the producers, other musicians around him at the time. He was part of the movement.
And also, I'd say that's like going from gray to dark gray to gunmetal. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like a insane difference.
Yeah.
It's more like a natural evolution.
Exactly. And so like, Bob was a big player in that type of music, but it wasn't necessarily directly him creating it. And he took a lot of musical direction and had a lot of musical minds around him. So to give him pure, things for creativity, I think Bob was special in other ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So
for sure.
I'm at a 2 out of 5 on creativity.
I'm coming in creativity at a 1. And again, this isn't, my rating today is going to piss a lot of people off, I'm sure. Bob Marley's not for me. It's just not. So understand that, where I'm coming from. I was listening to Legends earlier today. I mean, I know a lot of the songs, but I found myself by song 4 or 5 just kind of being like, yeah, I get it. Like, this is, there's nothing new being delivered to me here in songs, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of, that's kind of where I'm at with the creativity part. So what about replayability?
Yeah, so replayability is gonna hit. I'm gonna have a 4 out of 5 from me. Just at being an actual just fan of reggae in general, and the style of music, and specifically just liking Bob Marley a lot. But as far as the replayability, I'm at about a 4. If I could 3.5, I would, but we're gonna keep it clean. So
I think I'll be a little generous here and go 2. Because reggae is great when you're in the right place for it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's not something I'm going and listening to on my drive to work. But if we're in the right spot and the vibes are right and reggae's on, like it's like I said before the show started, like there's nothing better. Like that's definitely not when I want to hear anything else. Like that's the only thing that plays in that one spot for me.
It's so good feel good music. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's not always what you want to listen to.
I equated it to like Jimmy Buffett's genre of like beach music, where it's like, there's one place that I like to listen to that. And I don't even really seek it.
And even then,
I don't really seek it. It just happens to be on. And I'm like, this is nice,
Yep.
Same kind of thing here for me.
So cultural impact, this is actually going to be one of those ones where I almost want to put a 6 with Taylor Swift because of, I'm just really impressed with like people like Bob and Jimi Hendrix came to mind. People that are just in the music scene for not a whole lot of time, that are just able to, the impact that they're able to create is immense.
I think a lot of that impact comes from the fact that they weren't in it for very long. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that was one of the thoughts I thought too. Is like
it's the martyr syndrome.
Yeah, that like
if he stuck around till he was 80, would it have been the same?
Yeah, but I'll put a 5 to be fair, but I do think this could get away with the 6 out of 5 like Taylor did. Just because
I'm going to go 4, just because you can't really argue with the cultural impact Bob Marley has,
Like you just see his face.
I think if you're looking at the most influential musicians of all time, I don't think he's topping that list by any means, but he's definitely on it somewhere.
Yeah. Emotional connections, I gotta go at 2. Unfortunately, I don't share many of his religious views, but I do agree with his love message, with just for general peace and love, and just his happiness and the way he stands for life, and a lot of his messages. He's famous in a lot of interviews. People. There's one specific interview, and I hate a lot of the interviews because the British interviewers are just pricks, absolute pricks, dude. Yeah. And they're just so rude. And I'm so impressed with Bob with how he keeps his composure with most of them. But
that's awesome.
But one of them asks like, are you rich? Like. He goes like, define rich. And he's like, do you have $1 million? Like, and Bob's just looking at him like he's stupid. And he goes, possessions make you rich? He's like, nah, man, like life makes you rich. Like he never had a whole lot. And Bob always made sure that most of his money went to his family and the band and the people around him. he really was very connected with what matters most in life. So that is one message that I can emotionally connect to. However, he then has about like 70% of his music talking about Rastafarianism and Jah and that kind of stuff. And it's cool to, that I know about what he believes in and stuff, but unfortunately I'm not part of that group, so like I don't actually have emotional connection with that side of it, which is a huge part of his music. So I can connect with the love stuff, I can connect with his general vibes of love one another, but outside of that it's hard to really emotionally connect like spiritually and religiously with him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, no surprise, my emotional connection is going to come in at a 1. And my nostalgia factor is also going to come in at a 1, putting me at my first ever sub 2 1.8.
Yeah, see, unfortunately, my nostalgia is going to be very different from yours due to listening to a lot of Bob Marley as a child. And so 4 out of 5 for me on my nostalgia. Let me run my numbers and see where I am sitting at.
I got you. Maybe I did it wrong. Let me do it again to be sure. I got you to 3.4.
3.4?
Yep,
sounds good. 3.4 out of 5. Huh, I thought I would be higher.
It's like a dead half.
Yeah.
Almost. Well, a little bit above, I guess. That's 2.5.
Yeah, I thought I would be higher since Bob's one of my preferred, but then when I broke, it's the creativity and that emotional one. I cried during the movie. Does that get a 3 out of 5?
For the emotional connection?
Nah, but
were you crying for Bob, or were you crying for 70s Jamaican politics like you always do?
Yeah, it's really that creativity 2 out of 5 thing where like most people would probably fight you on that, but when you look at it logically, it shouldn't be super high.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up that a lot of the creativity in his career were the people around him more so than him.
Yeah, and I don't want to take anything away from him. He was a songwriter too, but like I said, go back and look at their music. Peter has a lot of songs he's written. There's a lot of direction from those producers pushing their sound and changing them. And like, just, you just got to look at the environment. And, most people would just be like, Bob's creative, because that's just where most people's headspaces go, is when they see someone famous, that person must be creative and, that kind of thing. It's just those associations. But when you really break it down, most of the reggae sounds like other reggae.
Yeah, which is something to be said for genres in general. But reggae is one of those genres that I think, there's a few.
There's not a whole bunch of variation.
For me, it's female pop, really, really heavy metal, depending, and like reggae, maybe a few others, where a lot of times if I'm not really familiar with what's going on, I can't tell the difference between artists even. Like,
do you think that breaks down to very similar drum beats? Does it come down?
The biggest two I would say would be drum beats and vocals.
Or vocals? Okay.
Yeah. Like if you put on a pop female artist, like
I have a hard time distinguishing them. I have
no idea if it's Selena Gomez or if it's, Camila Cabello. Like I have no idea. Some of them I'm starting to be able to pick. There's a few. I can always pick out Demi Lovato and Miley Cyrus because they have really unique voices. I'm starting to get to the point where I can pick out Taylor Swift, although her voice to me just sounds like, generic good female vocal. Like there's not a lot of like it's not like Demi Lovato. Like Demi Lovato sings, it's her. There's no question. Taylor Swift is not like that. Sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe this is, but I usually end up knowing her songs, so I know it's her. But
Yep. I was gonna say her from the songs.
And then there's a slew of other female artists that I just can't. I don't know. I just can't tell the difference of. And there's new ones every day that I'm like, oh, is that Selena Gomez? Nope, that's okay. Someone totally new I haven't heard of. Okay. So that's just one of those genres where I'm just like, I don't know. I have a hard time with it. Can't differentiate it.
Yeah. Well,
I brought that up before here though.
Yeah, that's going to wrap us up today. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. Give us a subscribe, like our videos. We're on TikTok and Instagram as well as give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or even Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. Apple helps grow, but Spotify will help us just the same, man. And we also have a Patreon at $5 or a $5 tier. That'll get you access to our private Discord, as well as getting a shout out on the show and the ability to vote on future topics.
There you go.
That's been Bob Marley.
Bob Marley, reggae legend.
Alrighty,
Cool,
guys.
man. Anything else to add today, or is that going to do it?
I think that'll wrap us up. It was a good one. One of my favorites.
Great one. Yeah, I learned a lot. I was glad to be a part of it. We'll see you guys next week for a talk show episode. And I think we have the topic, but I'm not sure we're 100% on that. So you guys will have to wait and see what that's going to be.
It'll be a surprise.
But until then, yeah, I'll see you guys next time. I'm Dallas.
And I'm Ashton.
See ya.
Peace.